depths below, I've always said that the fish bite best when the sun goes down. But after that night on Lake Whisper, I'm not so sure I want to test that theory again. It was a warm summer evening, the kind where the air hangs heavy and the mosquitoes swarm thick enough to carry off small children. I'd been out on the lake since mid-afternoon, my little aluminum boat drifting lazily across the glass-like surface. The fishing had been slow, but I wasn't in any hurry. At my age, any day on the water is a good day, catch or no catch. As twilight settled in, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I decided to try my luck at the drop-off near the old quarry. It was a spot I'd had success with in the past, where the lake bed suddenly plunged from 20 feet to over 100. The big ones like to hang out there, suspended in the cooler, deeper water. I cut the motor about 50 yards out and let the boat glide into position. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of water against the hull and the occasional plop of a jumping fish. I baited my hook with a fat nightcrawler and cast out, watching the line disappear into the darkening water. Time seemed to slow as I sat there, rod in hand, feeling the subtle vibrations traveling up the line. The first stars were just beginning to twinkle overhead when I felt it, a slight tug, barely enough to notice. I sat up straighter, every sense suddenly alert. Another tug, stronger this time. I tightened my grip on the rod, heart beginning to race. Whatever was on the other end of that line, it was big. The next pull nearly yanked the rod from my hands. I braced myself against the side of the boat and started to reel, but it was like trying to wind in a freight train. The drag screamed as line peeled off the reel faster than I could recover it. "Come on, you son of a bitch," I muttered through gritted teeth, fighting to keep the rod tip up. The boat rocked violently as I struggled with my unseen opponent. In all my years of fishing, I'd never felt anything like this. Suddenly, the resistance vanished. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I'd lost it. Then the line went taut again, this time pulling straight down. The rod bent nearly double as the full weight of the fish hit me. I planted my feet and leaned back, using every ounce of strength I had. Sweat poured down my face, muscles screaming in protest. Inch by agonizing inch, I gained line. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, there was a tremendous surge from below. The boat tilted dangerously, water sloshing over the gunnels. I lost my footing on the wet deck and stumbled, my center of gravity shifting too far to one side. In slow motion, I felt myself falling. The starry sky wheeled above me as I toppled over the side of the boat and into the inky black water of Lake Whisper. The shock of the cold drove the air from my lungs. I thrashed wildly, disoriented and panicked. Which way was up? I couldn't tell in the murky darkness. My waterlogged clothes dragged at me, pulling me down. As my lungs began to burn, a strange calm settled over me. I stopped struggling and opened my eyes, peering into the gloom. That's when I saw them. Eyes. Dozens of eyes, glowing with an eerie, pale light. They surrounded me, blinking slowly in the darkness. My mind reeled, unable to process what I was seeing. Fish eyes didn't glow like that. Fish eyes didn't look at you with such intelligence. I felt movement in the water, ripples of pressure against my skin as the owners of those eyes drew closer. Terror clawed at my throat, galvanizing me into action. I kicked hard, relief flooding through me as I broke the surface, gasping and sputtering. The familiar outline of my boat was just a few yards away. I struck out for it, my strokes frantic and clumsy. Behind me, I heard splashing. Something brushed against my leg, and I nearly screamed. I reached the boat and hauled myself over the side, collapsing onto the deck in a sodden heap. For a long moment, I just lay there, chest heaving as I gulped down air. The gentle rocking of the boat was soothing, almost enough to convince me that I'd imagined the whole thing. Then I heard it, a soft thump against the hull, followed by another and another. The boat rocked more insistently. Slowly, I crawled to the side and peered over. The water was alive with movement. Shapes darted just beneath the surface, their outlines indistinct in the fading light. As I watched, paralyzed, one of the shapes rose, breaking the water with a quiet splash. It was a fish, but like no fish I'd ever seen. Its body was pale, almost translucent, with a network of glowing veins visible beneath the skin. But it was the eyes that held me transfixed, large, bulbous, and filled with that same pale light I'd seen underwater. Eyes that were fixed directly on me with unnerving focus. I scrambled back, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. All around the boat, more of the creatures surfaced. Some were as small as my hand, others easily as long as my arm. All shared the same ghostly appearance and glowing eyes. The largest one, a behemoth that had to be at least 6 feet long, bumped the boat hard enough to make me stagger. I grabbed for the oars, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. I had to get out of there, but as I dipped the oars into the water, pale shapes swarmed around them. The resistance was immediate and unyielding. No matter how hard I pushed, the oars refused to move. It was as if the lake itself had turned to jelly. Panic rising in my throat, I lunged for the motor. The key turned, but the engine sputtered and died. I tried again and again, each failure ratcheting my fear higher. The boat rocked more violently as the creatures pressed against it from all sides. A particularly hard bump sent me sprawling. As I pushed myself up, I froze. There, flopping on the deck in front of me, was one of the smaller fish. It gasped soundlessly, gills working frantically as it stared at me with those impossible eyes. Without thinking, I reached out to touch it. Its skin was cold and slick, almost rubbery. As my fingers made contact, a jolt like static electricity shot up my arm. Images flashed through my mind, too fast to comprehend. Depths of blackness, flashes of bioluminescence, a sense of ancient, alien intelligence. I snatched my hand back with a strangled cry. The fish continued to stare, its glow pulsing gently. Then, with a powerful flip of its tail, it launched itself back into the water. For a moment, everything was still. Then, as one, the swarm of creatures began to move. They circled the boat, their pace increasing until the water churned with their passage. Faster and faster they swam, creating a whirlpool that caught my little boat in its grip. I clung to the bench seat, knuckles white, as the boat began to spin. Water sloshed over the sides, soaking me once again. The stars above blurred into streaks of light as we whirled faster and faster. Just when I thought the centrifugal force would tear the boat apart, everything stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. I raised my head, blinking away vertigo, and felt my jaw drop. We were no longer on Lake Whisper. The familiar shoreline was gone, replaced by an endless expanse of water that stretched as far as the eye could see. The water was glass smooth and black as ink, reflecting the star-filled sky above so perfectly that it was impossible to tell where the horizon lay. It was as if we were floating in the void of space itself. Trembling, I peered over the side of the boat. The pale fish were still there, but they were no longer swarming. Instead, they hung motionless in the water, all facing the same direction. Following their gaze, I saw a faint glow in the distance, growing steadily brighter. As I watched, the glow resolved itself into a truly massive shape rising from the depths. It was vaguely fish-like, but on a scale that defied comprehension. Its body was covered in the same network of glowing veins I'd seen on the smaller fish, but these pulsed with a hypnotic rhythm. And the eyes, oh God, the eyes. Each one was easily the size of my boat, ancient and knowing and utterly alien. I became aware of a low humming sound, more felt than heard. It resonated through the water, through the boat, through my very bones. With it came a sense of vast intelligence, of curiosity, of hunger. The massive being drew closer, the water barely rippling despite its size. I cowered in the bottom of the boat, mind reeling as I tried to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be a dream, a hallucination, anything but reality. But as one enormous I lowered to peer directly into my boat, I knew with sickening certainty that this was no dream. Whatever these creatures were, wherever they had taken me, this was all too real. The eye blinked, a gesture so human it was almost comical given its monstrous scale. I felt a pressure building in my head, a presence pushing against the boundaries of my consciousness. Images and sensations flooded my mind. The crushing depths of ancient oceans, the slow dance of tectonic plates, the birth of stars and death of worlds. I screamed, the sound pathetically small in the face of such vastness. The pressure increased, threatening to overwhelm me entirely. Just as I thought my sanity would shatter, everything went black. I awoke to the sound of lapping water and the cry of gulls. Sunlight stabbed at my eyes as I cracked them open, groaning at the pounding in my head. I was lying in the bottom of my boat, the familiar shoreline of Lake Whisper visible nearby. Had it all been a dream, a vivid hallucination brought on by heat stroke or dehydration? I wanted desperately to believe that, but the chill that ran down my spine told me otherwise. I could still feel the echo of that alien presence in my mind, could still see those glowing eyes when I closed my own. With shaking hands, I started the motor and pointed the boat toward shore. I don't know what happened out there on Lake Whisper, or if I'll ever fully understand it, but one thing's for certain, I'll never look at the water the same way again. Because now I know what lurks in the depths below, waiting for unwary anglers to drop their lines into the darkness. And sometimes, just sometimes, they decide to reel us in instead. I've seen a lot in my years as a wilderness fishing guide, but nothing could have prepared me for that night on Crater Lake. What started as a routine expedition turned into a nightmare that still haunts my dreams. Even now, as I sit here with a tumbler of whiskey, trying to make sense of it all, I can hear those voices calling out across the dark water. It was supposed to be a simple 3-day trip. Just me and my old friend Mike, showing a couple of city boys how to land the legendary rainbow trout that populate the crystal-clear waters of Crater Lake. We'd done this run 100 times before, but something felt off from the moment we pushed our boat away from the shore. The weather had been perfect when we set out. Calm waters, clear skies, and just enough of a breeze to keep the mosquitoes at bay. But as the afternoon wore on, I noticed dark clouds building on the horizon. They rolled in faster than any storm I'd ever seen, turning the sky an ominous shade of green. Maybe we should head back, Mike suggested, eyeing the approaching tempest. I was about to agree when one of our clients, a stocky guy named Pete, let out a whoop. "I've got something big," he yelled, his rod bending nearly double. The storm forgotten, we all crowded around as Pete battled what had to be the catch of a lifetime. The fish fought hard, stripping line off the reel in powerful runs. Just as Pete was starting to tire, a flash of silver broke the surface. It was the biggest rainbow trout I'd ever seen, easily 20 pounds or more. "Holy shit!" Mike breathed, reaching for the net. That's when we heard it, a high-pitched whine that cut through the air, growing louder by the second. I looked up just in time to see a small plane burst through the cloud cover, its nose pointed directly at the lake's surface. "Oh my God!" someone whispered. The plane was coming in fast, too fast. Its engine sputtered and coughed, black smoke trailing behind it. I watched in horror as it smashed into the water about a quarter mile from our position, sending up a massive plume of spray. For a moment, we all stood frozen, struggling to process what we'd just witnessed. Then training kicked in. "Mike, call it in," I shouted, already turning the boat towards the crash site. "You too. Grab the first aid kit and any blankets we've got." We raced across the lake, the storm forgotten in the urgency of the moment. As we neared the crash site, I cut the engine, not wanting to risk running over any survivors. The plane had gone down in deeper water, with only its tail still visible above the surface. "Hello," I called out, scanning the area for any sign of life. "Can anyone hear me?" Nothing but the lapping of waves against our hull answered. The surface of the lake was eerily calm, with no debris or oil slick that you'd expect from a crash. It was as if the water had simply swallowed the plane whole. "There!" Pete suddenly shouted, pointing off to our left. I saw something move. I swung the boat around, squinting into the gathering gloom. The storm was almost upon us now, the first fat droplets of rain splattering against the lake's surface. "Hello," I called again. "If you can hear us, make some noise." That's when I heard it, a faint cry, barely audible over the wind. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Help us," the voice called, weak and distant. "Please help us." I looked at Mike, seeing my own confusion mirrored in his eyes. The voice didn't seem to be coming from any particular direction. It was as if it was rising from the depths of the lake itself. "Where are you?" I shouted, frustration and fear making my voice crack. "We can't see you," another voice answered, this one more distinct. "Over here." "We're over here." I spun around, certain the sound had come from behind us. But there was nothing there, just more empty water stretching to the darkening horizon. The rain was coming down in sheets now, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Lightning flashed, illuminating the lake in stark, strobe-like bursts. In one of those flashes, I could have sworn I saw a face in the water, pale and wide-eyed, staring up at us from just beneath the surface. But when I blinked, it was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Mike shook his head, but his eyes were wide with fear. "I didn't see anything, but I heard something under the boat, like someone knocking." As if on cue, a dull thud resonated through the hull. Then another and another. It was as if something or someone was trying to get our attention from below. Pete and his buddy, whose name I couldn't even remember in that moment of terror, huddled together at the bow, their eyes darting nervously from the water to the sky and back again. "We need to get out of here," Pete's friend said, his voice high and tight with panic. "This isn't right. None of this is right." I was inclined to agree, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there were people out there who needed our help. The knocking continued, growing more insistent. "Hello?" A voice called, so close it made me jump. It sounded like it was coming from right next to the boat, but when I looked, there was no one there. "Please don't leave us. We're so cold." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the rain soaking through my jacket. The voice was pleading, desperate, but there was something off about it, something hollow. "Where are you?" I called back, fighting to keep my voice steady. "We can't see you. You need to tell us where you are." "We're here," another voice answered, this one sounding like a child. "We're all around you. Why can't you see us?" I exchanged a look with Mike, seeing my own terror reflected in his eyes. This wasn't possible. None of this was possible. The knocking on the hull had grown to a crescendo, as if dozens of hands were pounding on the underside of the boat. The voices multiplied, overlapping and echoing across the water. Men, women, children, all calling out for help, all seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Please," they begged, "don't leave us. We're so alone down here. So cold, so dark." Pete's friend let out a strangled sob. "Make it stop," he whimpered. "Oh, God, please make it stop." I wanted to. More than anything, I wanted to gun the engine and get us the hell out of there. But something held me back. A nagging sense of duty, of responsibility. What if there really were survivors out there, hidden by the storm and the darkness? "One more sweep," I said, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "We'll make one more pass, and then we head for shore." "Agreed." The others nodded mutely, their faces pale in the intermittent flashes of lightning. I started the engine, the familiar rumble providing a small measure of comfort in the surreal nightmare we found ourselves in. We moved slowly, all of us straining our eyes against the darkness. The voices continued, rising and falling like waves, sometimes whispers, sometimes screams. They begged us not to go, told us they were right there, just out of reach. We were about to give up when Pete suddenly stiffened, pointing off the port side. "There!" he shouted. "I saw someone." I swung the boat around, heart pounding. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then, in a flash of lightning, I caught a glimpse of something that turned my blood to ice. It was a face, just as I thought I'd seen earlier. But this time, I got a clearer look. The face was pale, bloated, with dark hollows where the eyes should have been. It smiled at me with lips pulled back too far, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. Then it was gone, leaving me to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing. But the looks on the others' faces told me they'd seen it too. "Go," Mike said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Go now." I didn't need to be told twice. I opened up the throttle, the boat leaping forward as we raced for the distant shore. The voices rose to a fever pitch, no longer pleading but angry, threatening. "You can't leave us," they howled. "We won't let you leave us." The lake itself seemed to come alive, waves rising up to batter our small craft. I fought with the wheel, struggling to keep us on course as water crashed over the sides. Through it all, I could hear something keeping pace with us, a rhythmic splashing, like dozens of bodies cutting through the water. I didn't dare look back, focusing all my attention on the approaching shoreline. We hit the beach hard, the impact nearly throwing us all from the boat. We scrambled onto land, collapsing on the pebbly shore as the storm raged around us. For a long moment, we just lay there, gasping for breath. Then, slowly, I raised my head to look back at the lake. The water was calm. No sign of pursuit, no ghostly faces, no impossible voices. Just the gentle lapping of waves against the shore and the fading rumble of thunder in the distance. We never did find any wreckage from the plane. The authorities searched for days, but it was as if it had never existed. Our story was met with skepticism and concern for our mental health. Eventually, we stopped talking about it altogether. But sometimes on quiet nights, I swear I can still hear those voices, calling out across the dark water, begging to be found, to be saved. And I wonder about what really lies beneath the surface of Crater Lake, waiting for unwary travelers to answer its call. I haven't been back since that night. Some part of me knows that if I ever return, the lake might not let me leave again. So I sit here with my whiskey, trying to forget the faces in the water and the voices in the storm. But deep down, I know I never will. The first rule of fishing is to always trust your gut. The second is to never, ever ignore the no trespassing signs. I broke both rules that day, and it nearly cost us everything. It was supposed to be a guy's weekend, just me and my two oldest friends, Tom and Craig. We'd been planning this fishing trip for months. A chance to escape our busy lives and reconnect over cold beers and the gentle lapping of water against a boat hull. But from the moment we arrived at the secluded lake, something felt off. We'd heard rumors about this place from other anglers. A hidden gem, they called it, with fish so big and plentiful you could practically walk across the water on their backs. But it was remote, hard to access, and supposedly on private property. That last bit should have been our first warning. After a grueling drive down winding dirt roads, we finally broke through the tree line and got our first glimpse of the lake. It was beautiful, I'll give it that. Crystal clear water stretched out before us, surrounded by dense forest that seemed to press in from all sides. The late afternoon sun glinted off the surface, making it look like hammered gold. "Holy shit," Tom breathed, voicing what we were all thinking. "This place is incredible." We quickly unloaded our gear, eager to get out on the water before we lost the light. That's when Craig noticed a sign. Guys," he called, pointing to a weathered piece of wood nailed to a nearby tree. "I think we might have a problem." I walked over, my heart sinking as I read the faded lettering. Private property. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. We stood there for a moment, looking at each other uncertainly. We'd come so far, and the lake looked so perfect. "Come on," I said finally, making a decision I'd soon regret. We've already driven all this way. Let's just fish for a bit and be gone before anyone notices. What's the worst that could happen? If only I'd known. We launched our small boat and spent the next couple of hours in angler's paradise. The rumors hadn't been exaggerated. The fish were biting like crazy, each one bigger than the last. We were so caught up in the excitement that we barely noticed the sun sinking below the treeline, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and purples. It wasn't until the first stars started to appear that I realized how late it had gotten. "We should head in," I said reluctantly, reeling in my line. "Pack up and get out of here before it's fully dark." That's when we heard it. The sound of an engine coming from the direction of the shore. A moment later, a spotlight cut through the gathering gloom, pinning us in its harsh glare. "You boys lost?" a voice called out, deceptively friendly. "This here's private property." My stomach dropped. "I'm so sorry, sir," I called back, squinting against the light. "We didn't realize. We'll pack up and be on our way immediately." There was a pause, and then a chuckle that sent chills down my spine. Now, no need for that. You've come all this way. Why don't you come ashore and we can discuss this like civilized folks? We didn't have much choice. We guided the boat back to the small dock, where a figure waited for us. As we got closer, I could make out more details. He was an older man, tall and lean, with a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. But it was his eyes that caught my attention. Pale blue and unnervingly intense, they seemed to look right through me. "Name's Jeremiah," he said, offering a calloused hand as we climbed out of the boat. "I own this little slice of heaven." We introduced ourselves, apologizing profusely for the trespass. To my surprise, Jeremiah waved off our concerns with a smile. "No harm done," he said. "In fact, I insist you boys stay for dinner. It's the least I can do for fellow anglers who've come so far." We tried to decline politely, but Jeremiah wouldn't hear of it. There was something in his manner, a subtle insistence that bordered on menace, that made it clear refusal wasn't an option. "I don't often get visitors," he said, leading us up a narrow path through the woods. "It'll be nice to have some company for a change." The path opened up into a small clearing where a log cabin stood, smoke curling from its chimney. It looked cozy enough, but something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Maybe it was the way the windows seemed to watch us as we approached, or the odd symbols carved into the doorframe. Inside, the cabin was cluttered but clean, every surface covered with an eclectic mix of fishing gear and what looked like antiques. Mounted fish adorned the walls, their glass eyes following us as Jeremiah ushered us to a large wooden table. "Make yourselves comfortable," he said, moving to the kitchen area. "Dinner's almost ready." As we sat, I noticed Tom eyeing a particularly ornate fishing rod mounted above the fireplace. "That's a beautiful piece," he said, always a gear enthusiast. Jeremiah's face lit up. "Ah, you've got a good eye," he said. "That there's a custom job, one of a kind, made from the bones of a very special fish." There was something in the way he said special that made my skin crawl. I was about to ask what he meant when he set a steaming pot down on the table. "Hope you boys like fish stew," Jeremiah said, ladling generous portions into our bowls. "It's an old family recipe." The stew smelled amazing, I had to admit, but as I raised the first spoonful to my lips, I caught Craig's eye. He looked as uneasy as I felt. Jeremiah watched us intently as we began to eat, those pale eyes never blinking. The stew was delicious, rich and flavorful, but there was an underlying taste I couldn't quite place. Something off. "So," Jeremiah said, leaning back in his chair, "tell me about yourselves. What brings 3 city boys out to my little corner of the world?" We gave him the abbreviated version of our friendship and our love for fishing. As we talked, I noticed Tom's speech becoming slightly slurred, his eyelids growing heavy. Craig didn't look much better, swaying slightly in his seat. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. What was happening? Had we drunk more than I realized? Jeremiah's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Feeling a bit tired, boys?" he asked, his voice seeming to come from very far away. "Don't worry, that's perfectly normal. Just let it happen." Alarm bells were screaming in my head, but my body refused to respond. I tried to stand, but my legs had turned to jelly. The room began to spin, colors blurring and shifting. What did you do to us?" I managed a slur. Fine to keep my eyes open. Jeremiah stood, looming over us. Now, he said soothingly. "No need to fret. You're about to become part of something much bigger than yourselves." As darkness crept in at the edges of my vision, I saw Jeremiah reach for something on a nearby shelf. It looked like a fishing hook, but much, much larger than any I'd ever seen. "You see," Jeremiah's voice drifted to me as if through water, "there's fishing, and then there's fishing. And you boys, you're about to help me land the catch of a lifetime." The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was Jeremiah's face, those pale eyes gleaming with an inhuman hunger. And behind him, something moving in the shadows, something huge and ancient and very, very hungry. I don't know how long I was out. When I came to, everything was pain and confusion. My head throbbed. My mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton, and every muscle in my body screamed in protest as I tried to move. Slowly, the world came into focus. I was lying on a cold, damp surface. Rock, I realized. The sound of lapping water echoed around me, and a faint, sickly green light filtered through the gloom. As my eyes adjusted, I made out Tom and Craig nearby, still unconscious. We were in some kind of cave, the walls glistening with moisture. And there, at the edge of the water that stretched out into darkness, stood Jeremiah. He was chanting in a language I didn't recognize, his arms raised towards the inky blackness of the subterranean lake. The massive hook I'd glimpsed earlier was now attached to a chain, disappearing into the depths. "Ah, you're awake," Jeremiah said, turning to me with that too wide smile. "Good. I was hoping you'd be conscious for this part. What is this?" I croaked, struggling to sit up. "What are you doing?" Jeremiah's eyes gleamed in the eerie light. "I'm fishing, my boy. Fishing for something that's been sleeping down there for a very, very long time. And you three, you're the bait." As if on cue, the water began to churn. Something was rising from the depths, something enormous. I caught a glimpse of scales, of tentacles, of eyes as big as dinner plates. Jeremiah laughed, a sound of pure, manic joy. "It's here," he cried. "After all these years, it's finally here." As the thing in the water surged towards us, I realized with horrible clarity that we had indeed broken the two most important rules of fishing. We had ignored our instincts, and we had trespassed where we didn't belong. And now, in this dark cave beneath a hidden lake, we were about to pay the ultimate price for our mistake. I've guided hundreds of people on fishing trips over the years, but I'll never forget Jake, the kid who taught me that sometimes the most dangerous predators aren't found in the water. It was supposed to be a simple mentoring program. Take a troubled teen, show him the ropes of fishing, maybe give him a new perspective on life. I'd done it dozens of times before, without a hitch. But Jake was different from the start. I first met him on a crisp autumn morning at the local community center. He slouched in the corner, all lanky limbs and adolescent awkwardness, a mop of dark hair hiding most of his face. When the program coordinator introduced us, Jake barely looked up, offering only a mumbled hey in response. "Jake's had a rough go of it," the coordinator told me quietly. "Maybe you can help him find some direction." If only I'd known then what rough really meant. The plan was simple. A weekend fishing trip to Lake Serenity, just the two of us. I figured some time away from the city, away from whatever troubles he was facing, might help Jake open up. As we loaded my old pickup truck with gear, I tried to engage him in conversation. "Ever been fishing before, Jake?" A shrug. "Nah." Well, you're in for a treat. There's nothing like the peace and quiet out on the water. He snorted softly. Yeah, whatever. The drive up to the lake was mostly silent, punctuated only by the occasional crackle of the radio and my attempts at small talk. Jake stared out the window, shoulders hunched, fingers drumming restlessly on his knee. I caught glimpses of scars on his arms, peeking out from beneath his sleeve. Old burn marks, maybe. We arrived at the lakeside cabin just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. As I unloaded the truck, Jake wandered down to the water's edge, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Beautiful, isn't it? I called out. He turned, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Longing, pain, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same mask of indifference. I guess, he muttered. We spent that first evening getting settled in the cabin, a cozy two-room affair that had been in my family for generations. I showed Jake how to bait a hook and tie basic knots, surprised by how quickly he picked it up. His fingers were nimble, almost too practiced for someone who claimed never to have fished before. As we sat on the porch later, nursing mugs of hot chocolate, I decided to try again at conversation. So, Jake, I began carefully, what do you like to do back home? Any hobbies? He was quiet for so long, I thought he might not answer. Then, softly, I like fire. A chill ran down my spine, though I couldn't say why. Oh, how do you mean? Jake's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something burning behind them. Something that made my stomach clench. The way it moves, he said, his voice taking on a dreamy quality. The way it consumes everything. It's beautiful. I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Well, that's interesting. Maybe we can build a campfire tomorrow night, yeah? He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It wasn't a comforting expression. That night, I lay awake for hours, listening to Jake's steady breathing from the other room. Something about the kid unsettled me, but I couldn't put my finger on what. He was troubled, sure, but lots of kids were. What made him different? I must have dozed off eventually because the next thing I knew, pale morning light was filtering through the curtains. I stretched, yawning, and made my way to the kitchen to start some coffee. That's when I noticed the silence. No sound of Jake moving around, no creaking floorboards or rustling sheets. Jake! I called out. No response. Heart racing. I pushed open the door to his room. The bed was empty, covers thrown back haphazardly. His backpack was gone. Panic rising in my throat, I burst out of the cabin, scanning the misty shoreline. Jake! I shouted. Jake! Where are you? Over here. I whirled around to see him emerging from the trees, backpack slung over one shoulder. His hair was damp with dew, his shoes muddy. Jesus. Kid, you scared me half to death, I said, relief washing over me. What were you doing out there? He shrugged, that maddeningly non-committal gesture I was growing to hate. Just exploring. As he brushed past me into the cabin, I caught a whiff of something acrid. Smoke? We spent the morning out on the lake, and despite my lingering unease, I had to admit Jake was a natural. He cast with precision, reeled with patience, and even managed to land a decent-sized trout on his third try. Nice one, I said, genuinely impressed. You sure you've never done this before? That ghost of a smile again. Beginner's luck, I guess. As the day wore on, Jake seemed to relax a bit. He even laughed once when I nearly fell out of the boat trying to net a particularly feisty bass. But there was still something in his eyes, something guarded and watchful, that kept me on edge. It was as we were cleaning our catch for dinner that Jake finally started to open up. My dad used to fish, he said quietly, hands moving deftly with the fillet knife. Before, you know. I nodded, encouraging him to continue. He took me once, when I was little. I don't remember much, just the smell of the lake and his laugh. There was a vulnerability in his voice that made my heart ache. What happened to him, Jake? His hands stilled, knuckles white around the knife handle. He hurt my mom. Bad. So I hurt him back. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I fought to keep my voice steady. What do you mean, you hurt him back? Jake's eyes met mine, and in them I saw a darkness that made my blood run cold. I waited until he passed out drunk. Then I lit his bed on fire. My mind reeled, struggling to process what I was hearing. This kid, this quiet, awkward teenager, had tried to burn his own father alive? Jake, I said carefully, did you kill him? He shook his head, looking almost disappointed. Nah. Neighbors smelled the smoke, called the fire department. He got out with some bad burns, that's all. A pause, then quieter. Sometimes I wish I'd used more gasoline. I felt sick. All the pieces were falling into place. The scars on his arms, his fascination with fire, the smell of smoke this morning. What had I gotten myself into? Jake, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. You know that's not okay, right? No matter what your dad did, you can't just... Can't what? He snapped, eyes flashing. Can't fight back? Can't protect myself and my mom? What was I supposed to do? Just let him keep hurting us. I held up my hands placatingly. I'm not saying that, but there are other ways, Jake. Legal ways. Safe ways. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that had no place coming from someone so young. Yeah, right. Like the cops ever did anything. Like the counselors and social workers ever helped. You don't get it. None of you do. With that, he stormed off, leaving me standing there with a half-clean fish and a growing sense of dread. That night, as we sat around the campfire, I tried to broach the subject again. Jake, listen, I know you've been through a lot, more than any kid should have to deal with. But what you did, it's serious. Have you talked to anyone about it? A therapist, maybe? He stared into the flames, face unreadable. They don't understand. Nobody does. I'm trying to, I said gently. I want to help you, Jake, but I can't do that if you don't let me in. For a long moment, he was silent. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. I like the fire because it makes me feel strong, like I'm in control. When everything else is chaos, fire listens to me. I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe we were finally getting somewhere. I get that, but there are healthier ways to feel in control, Jake. Ways that don't hurt people. He turned to me then, and the look in his eyes made my blood run cold. Who says I want to stop hurting people? Before I could respond, he stood abruptly. I'm going to bed, he announced, then disappeared into the cabin. I sat there for a long time, watching the flames dance and trying to figure out what to do. I was way out of my depth here. This kid needed serious help. The kind I wasn't equipped to provide. But I couldn't just abandon him, either. As I finally made my way inside, I noticed Jake's door was ajar. Peering in, I saw him curled up on the bed, looking for all the world like any other sleeping teenager. It was hard to reconcile this image with the darkness I'd glimpsed earlier. I didn't sleep much that night, my mind racing with possibilities and plans. By morning, I'd made a decision. We'd cut the trip short, head back to the city, and I'd make sure Jake got the help he needed. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best I could do. But when I went to wake him, the room was empty. Again. This time, though, there was no sign of him anywhere. His backpack was gone, along with some of our supplies. And there, on the bedside table, was a note. Thanks for the fishing lessons. Sorry about your truck. My heart pounding, I ran outside. My pickup was gone, a trail of dust still hanging in the air down the dirt road. As I stood there, trying to process what had just happened, I smelled it. Smoke. Turning slowly, I saw tendrils of gray curling up from behind the cabin. By the time I rounded the corner, the back wall was already engulfed in flames. As I watched my family's cabin burn, Jake's words echoed in my head. Who says I want to stop hurting people? I tried to be a mentor, to make a difference in a troubled kid's life. Instead, I'd given a budding arsonist, maybe worse, new skills and a means of escape. Some lessons, it turns out, come at a much higher price than we're prepared to pay. I've been ice fishing for over 30 years, but nothing could have prepared me for that day on Lake Whisper. What started as a peaceful winter outing turned into a nightmare that still haunts me. Even now, as I sit by my fireplace, I can hear the cracking ice and my dog's desperate barks echoing in my mind. It was mid-January, and the lake had been frozen solid for weeks. I've been itching to get out there, to feel the familiar thrill of dropping a line through the ice and waiting for that telltale tug. My old yellow lab, Max, was just as excited. He'd been my faithful companion on these trips for the past decade, always alert for any sign of fish and happy to keep me company in the long, cold hours. The morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of day that makes you glad to be alive. The sun glinted off the snow-covered landscape as I loaded up my truck with gear. Max bounded around my feet, tail wagging furiously, his breath coming out in excited puffs of steam. "Ready for an adventure, boy?" I asked, scratching behind his ears. He let out a joyful bark in response. The drive to Lake Whisper was uneventful. The roads empty this early on a weekday. As we pulled up to the shoreline, I saw we had the place to ourselves. Perfect. I unloaded the sled with my gear and started the trek out onto the ice, Max trotting happily beside me. The lake was a vast expanse of white, broken only by the dark silhouettes of bare trees along the distant shore. The ice creaked and groaned beneath our feet, but I wasn't worried. I checked the thickness myself last week, a solid 18 inches, more than enough to support us. We made our way to my favorite spot, about a quarter mile from shore. I set up my portable shelter, drilled a few holes, and settled in for a day of peaceful fishing. Max curled up at my feet, content to doze in the warmth of the shelter. The morning passed slowly, marked only by the occasional tug on my line and the rhythmic sound of my auger as I drilled new holes. By early afternoon, I had a respectable catch of perch and one decent-sized northern pike. That's when things started to go wrong. Max's head suddenly shot up, ears perked. He let out a low whine, something I'd never heard from him before. "What is it, boy?" I asked, peering out of the shelter. The lake looked the same as it had all day, an unbroken expanse of white. Max stood, his whole body tense. Before I could react, he bolted out of the shelter and took off across the ice. "Max!" I yelled, scrambling to my feet. "Max, come back." But he was already a yellow blur in the distance, running full tilt towards the center of the lake. I cursed, grabbed my coat, and set off after him. The wind had picked up, biting through my layers as I ran. Max's barks echoed across the empty landscape, growing fainter by the second. What had gotten into him? I'd gone maybe 100 yards when I heard it. A sound that turned my blood to ice. A deep, resonant crack like a gunshot. I froze, suddenly acutely aware of the vast expanse of frozen water beneath my feet. "Max!" I called again, my voice tight with fear. "Here, boy." Another crack, louder this time, and then another. The ice was shifting, I realized with growing horror. Shifting and melting? It didn't make sense. The temperature was well below freezing, had been for weeks. But as I watched, a dark patch of water appeared about 50 yards ahead, right in Max's path. "Max, stop!" I screamed, my heart pounding. "Come back." He finally seemed to hear me, skidding to a halt just short of the open water. He turned, barking frantically, but made no move to come back. I inched forward, trying to keep my weight distributed. The ice groaned ominously with each step. More cracks were appearing, radiating out from the hole like spider webs. "It's okay, boy," I called, trying to keep my voice calm. "Just stay there. I'm coming." 20 yards away now. 15. The hole was growing larger, dark water lapping at its edges. How was this possible? 10 yards. Max whined, shifting nervously from paw to paw. "Good boy," I said. "Just a little closer and we can go home." 5 yards. I could see the fear in Max's eyes now, so human-like it made my chest ache. That's when the ice gave way beneath him. One moment he was there, the next he disappeared into the inky black water with a startled yelp. Without thinking, I lunged forward. The cold hit me like a physical blow, driving the air from my lungs. For a moment, I was paralyzed, unable to think or move. Then survival instinct kicked in, and I started thrashing, searching desperately for Max in the murky water. My hand brushed against fur, and I grabbed on, pulling with all my strength. Max's head broke the surface, his eyes wide with panic. I managed to heave him partly onto the ice, but each time I tried to pull myself up, the edge crumbled beneath my weight. "Go, Max!" I gasped, giving him a push. "Get to shore." But my faithful companion wouldn't leave. He stood at the edge of the hole, barking and whining, occasionally lunging forward to tug at my coat. The cold was seeping into my bones now, my movements becoming sluggish. I knew I didn't have much time left. With a supreme effort, I managed to hook my elbows over the ice. That's when I saw it. Just beneath the surface, something moved. Something large. A fish? No. It was too big, too wrong. I caught a glimpse of pale, almost translucent skin, of a sinuous body far longer than any fish that should be in this lake. Terror gave me a fresh burst of strength. I heaved myself up and out of the water, scrambling away from the hole on my hands and knees. Max pressed against my side, whimpering softly. We weren't safe yet. All around us, the ice was breaking up, more dark patches of water appearing. The wind had died down completely, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the cracking of ice and our ragged breathing. "We have to move, boy," I said, my teeth chattering violently. "Come on." We started back toward shore, picking our way carefully around the growing patches of open water. Each step was agony, my wet clothes already freezing solid in the frigid air. We were maybe halfway back when Max suddenly stiffened, a low growl rumbling in his chest. I followed his gaze and felt my heart stop. Something was following us. I could see ripples in the patches of open water, all moving in our direction, and in the ice itself. Were those handprints? Impossible. And yet I could clearly see the outlines of elongated fingers pressed against the underside of the ice. "Run!" I yelled, my voice cracking with fear. We took off, all caution forgotten. The ice creaked and groaned beneath our feet, but I barely noticed. All I could focus on was the shore, still agonizingly far away. A loud crack split the air, and I felt the ice give way beneath my right foot. I stumbled, crying out as icy water engulfed my leg up to the knee. Max skidded to a stop, barking frantically. I pulled my leg free and scrambled forward, not daring to look back. The shore was closer now, maybe 100 yards away. We could make it. We had to make it. 90 yards. 80. The sounds of cracking ice grew louder, more frequent. 70 yards. 60. Was that a hand reaching up through a hole in the ice behind us? 50 yards. 40. My lungs were burning, my wet clothes like lead weights. 30 yards. 20. Almost there. 10 yards. The solid ground of the shore was right there, so close I could almost touch it. With a final, desperate lunge, we made it. I collapsed onto the snowy bank, gasping for air. Max pressed against me, his whole body trembling. For a long moment, we just lay there, too exhausted and terrified to move. Then, slowly, I raised my head to look back at the lake. The ice was intact. No open water, no mysterious handprints, no sign of the chaos we just fled. It looked exactly as it had when we'd first arrived that morning. Had I imagined it all? Some kind of hypothermia-induced hallucination? But then I saw them, dark shapes moving beneath the ice, just at the edge of visibility. And for a split second, I could have sworn I saw a pale, inhuman face pressed against the underside of the ice, watching us with cold, alien eyes. I scrambled to my feet, suddenly desperate to be away from this place. "Come on, Max," I said, my voice shaking. "Let's go home." As we hurried back to the truck, I made a silent vow. I would never set foot on Lake Whisper again. Some waters, I realized, are better left undisturbed, and some creatures should remain hidden beneath the ice.